Okay, let's bring in National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and Labor Senator Deborah O'Neil. Good afternoon to you both. Look, what's your view, Bridget, on whether these laws proposed by the Albanese government would curb free speech?
I don't think there's any question about that, Sharri, and you've been raising this for a long time, and I think the evidence today would show that. It's incredible overreach by a first-term government who are simultaneously ramping up support for the war in Ukraine while seeking to implement Soviet-style misinformation and disinformation communication legislation.
Wow.
Giving unnamed bureaucrats in Canberra the power to define what health means, what health to the environment means, what harm in a whole raft of areas actually is defined as. And I think we need to stand up. Every foundation of our liberal democracy is built on the fact that every citizen has a right to speak their mind, to be heard respectfully, and for the majority to decide.
Deborah, I've spoken about how the origin of the virus in Wuhan, the Hunter Biden laptop, some COVID rules. You know, a lot of this was restricted online, some of it entirely censored because it was called misinformation when it never was. You know, Bridget there just says it would be up to unnamed bureaucrats to decide what's misinformation. But, you know, this is a legitimate question. Who would actually decide what's misinformation, and how can anyone decide that? Isn't it a slippery slope, Deborah O'Neil?
Look, thanks for the question. Thanks for the opportunity to debate this really important position. The fact is that this piece of legislation is still in draft stage, and people can make submissions until the 6th of August, and that's what we're seeing Meta do. Happily, they were on board with the work of the previous government, and they've signed up to the voluntary code. Now, the next step was actually heralded on the 21st of March by the honourable Paul Fletcher MP, and I'm sure that Bridget would have been in the room when the decision was made. And this is, I'm quoting from the media release that indicates that ACMA will be given reserve powers to register and enforce industry codes or make industry standards, and this will encourage platforms to be ambitious. They're going to give ACMA the ability to hold platforms to account should their voluntary efforts provide inadequate or untimely. So essentially, this is what was recommended in the review of by ACMA to what needs to happen. It was adopted, and there's a press release from the previous government. It's now being advanced with a proposal to hopefully have this able to go to Parliament.
Apologies, sorry for interrupting, but I'm just hearing you say that this is actually the previous government's plan.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes. So I have read you word for word from the Honourable Paul.
From Paul Fletcher's plan. Right. Well, what's your response to this, Bridget McKenzie, that this is actually a coalition government plan to curb free speech, to crack down on misinformation?
Well, Sharri, there is no way, when you've seen the number of former cabinet ministers, now shadow cabinet ministers, come out and slam this, that this is indeed the implementation of the former government's response to bullying of young children. Can I just read from the fact sheet, because Deb is doing a lovely deflection job. This is online for anyone at home that wants to look it up. Harm to the health of Australians. Harm. Who is going to define that harm? What about the mental health issues of young children in my home state of Victoria during Daniel Andrews' lockdown? I won't be able to speak about that. Deborah, you won't be able to speak about that as a mother. Second, harm to Australians' environment, which in their own fact sheet talks about when we're in drought, talking about water-saving measures. And I can tell you the difference between how those of us who have to live through drought think about how water should be used during a drought and how Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane may think about it will be different. And we have to have a right to absolutely stand up and say what the problem is.
Deborah, you know, even if this was a coalition government's plan or proposal put forward first by Paul Fletcher, I mean, you know, you have been criticising the coalition's robo-debt scandal, so it doesn't mean this should be adopted. It doesn't mean it was a good idea. Do you concede that there are concerns, not just raised by journalists in the media, that this would impact on content we can report, on investigative journalism, but even Meta, Facebook, is saying it could curb free speech, have a chilling effect on free speech?
So robo-debt was definitely a really bad one, but this is an independent review. And what we see with Meta is they're actually dealing far less hysterically than the current opposition with the reality that confronts us. So they're doing things like actually making sure that they're paying more fact checkers to try and get accurate information out, because they know that they have a responsibility to make sure that there's no personal health challenges. The safety of Australians matters to Meta, and they're investing in partnerships with Reach Out, a mental health agency. They're also making sure that they improve their AI so they can actually pick up directly themselves and block the accounts of people who are doing that. So the problem is well described and understood by Meta. They have signed on to a voluntary code. They are raising concerns about how this might be further developed, but they are already in there making assessments, which was their commitment about misinformation and disinformation.
And making them wrong often. I mean, they're fact checkers. Everyone's fact checkers often get it wrong.
Yeah.